So welcome to our Talking Tech webinar. We're going to be talking today about the biggest challenges and opportunities facing legal practice in 2025. I'm your host, Caroline Hill. I'm the editor of Legal IT Insider, and we have got an A-class panel with you today for our webinar with OneAdvanced, our partner. We've got first up on our panel, Sam Dixon, who is Chief Innovation Officer and Partner at transatlantic law firm Womble Bond Dickinson. Sam was previously a restructuring and insolvency lawyer at Bond Dickinson, which merged with Womble Carlyle in 2017, which is when Sam joined Bond Dickinson's innovation group, becoming head of innovation in 2021. Hi, Sam.
Morning, Caroline.
Nice to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining me. We have Olivia Wild, who's the founder of legal transformation and innovation consultancy Locks Legal. Olivia is a former Freshfields lawyer who in 2015 moved out of legal practice to set up Freshfields Legal Services Centre, going on to become global head of its 400 people strong Manchester client delivery group. Hi, Olivia.
Hello from sunny Northwest.
Yeah, and it is sunny.
Nice to meet you all.
We've got Alex Hamilton, who is CEO and founder of contracting specialist and new law firm Radiant Law. He was previously a partner at Latham & Watkins, and he practiced at Shaw Pittman and Norton Rose. And he's also the author of Sign Here, the Enterprise Guide to Signing Contracts Quickly. Hi, Alex.
Hey, Caroline.
Thank you for coming and joining me. And then last but not least, we've got Doug Hargrove, who is Senior Vice President for Legal and Professional Services at our webinar partner, OneAdvanced. Prior to joining OneAdvanced in 2013 through an acquisition, Doug served as the Managing Director of Iris Legal for 3 years. Many of you will be familiar with Iris. He was Managing Director of Education and Legal until September 23, when he became SVP with P&L responsibility for the 2 key verticals of legal and professional services. Hi, Doug.
Good morning, Caroline, and good morning to all the attendees this morning.
Thanks so much. Thanks for joining me. So just quick introductions and just quick housekeeping. So please do enable your chat. Many of you have already. This is interactive. We'd love to hear your questions. We are going to be talking about the challenges that are facing law firms this year, what will have the biggest impact on firms in 25, what strategies firms need to have to be competitive, and how firms will evolve over the years, and possibly, if we have time, what legal software will help them to move forward as a business. When we discussed what the challenges in the very broad sense may be, we really did come down mostly to Gen AI. So actually that's going to be much of the focus of the challenges portion. Do you think, so perhaps starting with you, Sam, what do you think are going to be, would you agree, first of all, that we should focus on Gen AI when we're talking about challenges for 2025?
I think that's right, Caroline. Gen AI this is going to be the year where everyone gradually realizes that Gen AI is critical in quite a lot of the tasks that we do as lawyers if we want to provide that best possible service. So yeah, why don't we focus on Gen AI? That's a good place to start.
I know that there'll be disagreement. You'll be pleased to hear for people listening that there's going to be some disagreement, which is that wouldn't be a proper discussion without some disagreement. But Sam, continuing with that, so tell me, so is it things like, what do you think this will be the year when law firms start to really adopt Gen AI in earnest, or do you think there's still far too much hype? Those two are not mutually exclusive.
They're not, Caroline. I completely agree. I think this is the year where people will start to use it across broad swathes of the business, across lots of different tasks. But I also think this is a year of learning. And I think that it's important that the profession learns together, that we learn with clients. The challenges that we're going to have are, as ever, adoption. And that's twofold to my mind. You've got that challenge around how do you get everyone to adopt this uniformly and in the best possible way. But you've also got the challenge, yes, that there are people who might not want to get involved, might not embrace things in the way that they could. Then at the other end, we will have people potentially across the profession who perhaps embrace things too vociferously and perhaps don't follow policy, perhaps use public Gen AI tools. And we need to make sure that we're managing things in a way where Gen AI is benefiting clients, benefiting the profession, and isn't necessarily causing a whole host of problems along the way.
Yeah, by all means, this is it. So feel free to jump in. Anybody else who's got views on that? I think we've seen it's really been a really difficult year for firms in terms of, do you ban or not ban? That's the way, like, do you ban public tools? Do you, there's been having to be real careful management of that from the point of view of we're trying to facilitate learning and we're trying to facilitate to establish use cases. But at the same time, it's really difficult to manage that, isn't it? In terms of, making sure that from a client perspective, we're looking after the client's best interests.
And I think on that banning point, Caroline, if you ban outright without providing anything as an alternative, you're probably just going to push people underground anyway, which is even more dangerous. So there is a real balancing act there.
Yeah, I don't know, Olivia, if you want to comment on that point. I know you've had both experience from private practice and now advising law firms.
I think you want to try, and you want to encourage a mindset within the organisation or the firm that is an innovative mindset that encourages growth. And by maybe overly restricting without explanation, you can discourage that innovative mindset. So key is to make sure that if you've got a lot of, if it's going to be the Gen AI and anger year, then how do you make that sustainable? And you can make it sustainable through having a really innovative mindset amongst your teams, and people know where you're going. If people know where you're going, then I think people can come along for the ride much more easily. Whereas if you are simply telling and not necessarily educating, people will find it more difficult to come along for the ride. I do think Gen AI is a massive thing for this year, that's clear. The additional activity around making a success for sustainability and mindset is equally key.
I feel like, so I want to come back to that actually, but I feel like I need to bring Alex in at this point, and then we'll go back to some of the points about perhaps use cases and how firms manage change. But so I know Alex takes a very different view, which is that Gen AI is a bit of a red herring. So let's bring that on the table, Alex.
Well, I agree with everything everyone said. I think it's all a bit performative, isn't it, really? Like the real test is the bills coming down? Is the work being done faster? Is it being done to a higher quality, right? So, easier, better, faster, cheaper, right? That's what improvement looks like. So the cost of legal services should be coming down from the law firms, right? They should be delivering faster. They should be delivering better outcomes. And that should be measured and seen. I don't think everyone's like, yeah, we're going to do Gen AI and it's all changed and you don't do it, you're going to be left behind and so on. But they're going to get a little bit uncomfortable when it comes to it. And you bring your bills down, right? And, I've just been on this so many damn times. I know it's this time it's different, but this time, every last time it was different. So is it a sustaining or a disrupting innovation, in the words of Clayton Christensen, right? And I think it's sustaining. I think it's like the BlackBerry or whatever, and people use it, and that's great. But everyone goes a little bit quiet when it comes to, okay, so you're reducing billable hours, right? Right?
Do you think, I just want to be clear about where you're coming from. So do you think I agree with you that, so it's got to be outcome focused and based rather than just AI for the sake of AI. But are you suggesting that really we don't have to use it, or there's sort of alternatives? I think probably everyone on this panel would disagree. So I'm actually fascinated. If you're saying we're not going to need to use it, I'd love to know more about why. I mean, we probably shouldn't focus entirely on this because we've got lots of, but I would love to know a little bit more about why that is.
Oh, I don't think the legal industry is serious industry, right? I mean, it takes itself very seriously, but I don't think it's a serious industry. Like last May, I was in Florida talking at the Shingo conference. Shingo is all about lean and how you do it, and they'd never really seen a lawyer there before, let alone have one talking, and they were very polite. But that was a room full of serious people, they weren't talking about AI. What they were talking about is how do you build culture of continuous improvement and behaviors and processes and tools in that context. And they would never have a conversation led by tools. They would be talking about what is the value for the customer? How do we deliver that? And they would, there's all these kind of principles from there. And I think that's what a serious conversation would be, is how do we create great value? Like, we'll use Gen AI in various places, but like, it's not for us. The thing is, how do we get faster, better, cheaper, make it easier for our clients? And if it helps, that's cool. But like, the serious conversation starts with process, behavior, and purpose, not tools.
I agree. I've seen some amazing research which is coming out soon. At the moment, it's not out there, which shows side by side human to named Gen AI tools in terms of comparison and things like extraction, summarization, and it is amazing and time saving, and it's going to, blow everyone's minds. But I agree. I don't think that again is mutually exclusive to talking about. We should be talking about people, process optimization, all of those things. I think that the two go very much hand in hand. I don't think that one can happen without the other. Doug, can I bring you in? I mean, you see this. You've obviously worked with different industries. Do you think, what's your sort of take on this, perhaps given the wider context that you have as well?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, technology should always be an enabler to business outcomes. So technology in itself is not the reason the business exists. Businesses should be looking to achieve better productivity, better customer service, and then think about how technology can enable those outcomes to drive their purpose. And it's interesting, Caroline, what we see a lot. First of all, technology is moving at an alarming rate. And it's sometimes really difficult to keep up with what's taking place. And at a point we are getting comfortable with generative AI. We're now talking about agentic AI, where generative AI can start to create agents of work that, for example, could sit alongside a lawyer and deal with things like contract drafting. It can do decision making. It can serve up. And that would make sense if that's the outcome you're trying to achieve. And interestingly, we talk to a lot of law firms, but also a lot of health and care, where we're very large in that industry as well, about the need to drive efficiency, the need to drive sustainability, the need to drive compliance. And you can see how technology could enable those outcomes. And for us, that's where we see things like generative AI, and we see things like agentic AI in particular, starting to assist outcomes faster, quicker, greater compliance going forward. But I think to Alex's point, it isn't technology for technology's sake. It has to have a purpose which enables a business to drive better, more sustainable outcomes.
Yeah, I agree. So just so that people don't think that I've said ask questions and then we're going to ignore them for the whole duration. So we were going to talk about use sort of key use cases. So there's a question, Sam, do you have an area in mind for use of Gen AI? Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, happy to. I mean, I think for us, when we've run pilots of some Gen AI tools that we've now rolled out, we've deliberately tested that across the whole of the business. And we've seen opportunities in every business group, every work type, contentious, non-contentious, and various different tasks. So I think we have to remember that lawyers do an awful lot of text-based work, and therefore Gen AI naturally fits into quite a lot of what they do, not to complete the task end to end, but to help a lawyer sat there in the loop to complete those tasks. So the kinds of things we're looking at, you touched before, Caroline, on things like summarization, using it for summarization, for helping you do a first draft of a chronology, or pulling together, getting past that blank page, that starting from scratch piece, having something to work with is really useful. But also reviewing and analysing documents, for me, is a really, really interesting use case, because we all, as lawyers, read things and analyse them all the time. And actually being able to have a tool to help make that easier is a better, yes, it can drive better outcomes for our clients. Undoubtedly, it allows us to find things that we wouldn't find otherwise. It allows us to turn things around quicker. It acts as that second pair of eyes. But it's also a better way of working, in my experience. I think I said in our pre-call, and I'm happy to share it on here as well, that if some of the Gen AI that I'm working with at the moment was taken off me, I think I might cry, because I've really got used to working in a different way.
It's amazing how addictive It is. Someone described it as addictive, and once you start using it in earnest, it is quite addictive. So then I don't know if anybody else had anything that they desperately wanted to come in on that before we talk about
interesting areas, Caroline, that we're seeing and researching, and we hear playback from the industry are in areas of document drafting. I think to Sam's point, the whole area of research, but even things like the speed up of bill to cash ratios and narratives in terms of helping that bill to cash be smoother in terms of collections process. So I think there are lots and lots of areas. I'll come back to what I said before, but I think super important for the industry is to work out the outcomes you want, the change maybe in the way you want to manage customers and their expectations, the things that are important for the business, and then see technology and generative AI and agentic AI as things that can enable that outcome to be more consistent, more efficient, and importantly, a better experience for customers.
Yeah.
And I can see that someone has just commented actually in the chat that, and I agree with this comment. So if we take both of those approaches from Sam and from Doug, which one looking at, specific practice groups maybe, or specific, it could be research, document review, drafting across those practice groups that you mentioned, Sam, contentious and non-contentious. And then a step back, looking at sort of the operations of a law firm and how you can actually make efficiency gains through, like you were talking about, Doug, through time recording or narratives, and then through to increased realization probably. And I think the guest, I can't see the names in the chat, but I think that that's what that comment is about as well. So I totally agree with that. Take a step back a bit and have a look at the operations as well as the way in which you're delivering the legal work.
Yeah, I'd say on the operational side, that's probably where have seen some of the most headway. And then there's almost like a sliding scale, and then you get to research, which is still more tricky. But before that, there's a ton of areas. I've seen so much clever stuff coming down the line in terms of outside council guidelines and measuring, making sure that you're not losing money, in terms of partners typically going, oh, it's going to cost this much, but actually how much did it cost before? There's so many really obvious applications where it's being used. In terms of the practice side of things, so there's a question here about moving towards AFAs, where we obviously anticipated and hoped that, we planned for this to come up, but it's in the question as well. So what the impact, obviously, by using Gen AI, so that things that would have taken potentially 5 hours may take 2 hours, but the law firm is obviously still supplying huge amounts of value for people that are using the billable hour. That creates huge challenges, and the industry is having to wrestle with that. We've talked about the death of the billable hour. I've been a legal journalist for longer than I'd like to admit, and we've talked about, because I don't want to admit how old I am, but then we've talked about the death of the billable hour for donkey's years. Alex has never used the billable hour at Radiant Law, which is one of the reasons for wanting to have him on. And obviously most firms have got some kind of mixture, but to anybody on the panel, is this going to finally be the moment that we see the death of the billable hour this year? Maybe not this year, but are we going to start to see it this year?
When the customers ask for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a trend we've seen for a while, Caroline, which is increasingly, the billable hour is moving more to fixed price and certainty and outcome for the clients. We across the industry, it's about 50-50 now, and just 10 years ago it was more weighted towards the billable hour. So we see that increasingly. I think what's we hear more from managing partners in particular is less about billable hour or fixed price and more about certainty and speed of outcome. That seems to be something they're really focused on at the moment. And that then drives back towards how do we drive operational efficiency to drive certainty and outcome for our clients. But the trend we've seen for many years now is the billable hour increasingly is trending towards fixed price work and certainty and outcome for clients.
Yeah. Does anyone agree with that? Or does everyone
Well,
agree
they would
with
say that, wouldn't they? Of course, they don't want to have the awkward conversation about money. I mean, I think it's all again bar backwards, right? You go to alternative fee arrangements, alternative of just a fixed price, because then you've actually got your incentives aligned. And, you know, we're running at Radiant 14 years fixed price only. We did a fixed price to £1 billion deal in our first year. But that's led us on a journey of figuring out how to do it better and better, which is why I'm slightly skeptical on this stuff, because our current performances, we're doing multi-million-pound deals for £650. Right, we turn contracts in half a day 80% of the time. We've got a 4.7 out of 5 customer satisfaction from the business, and none of it with AI. And, you know, obviously we wouldn't draft by hand, right, or use an LLM, because we've used document automation everywhere, because that's the only sane thing to do if you actually had skin in the game, and so on and so forth. Right, so you can get to those kind of performance points if you actually get your incentives aligned, and that's what should be happening. But it's too hard to get people to move, and the clients don't really care. If they really cared, it would have changed. And so here we are.
I think the difficulty has been, and it's funny because Alex and I were on a panel about 10 years ago, Alex, talking about value billing, and actually it turned out that there were a ton of people in the audience from the real estate sector who did use AFAs and who felt a little bit patronised because we were like going, oh, you really should do. And they were like, we do AFAs, we don't do the billable. So, you know, I know it's been a trend for a long time, but underpinning it all, and often from the client side, is how do we measure value? How do we measure? And often the clients I hear are the ones actually saying they're still sort of measuring time. And it's kind of really, it's going to be a much deeper conversation for people as to how you start to measure value possibly. And I've heard about, sorry, carry on.
So we always talk here around, you know, not hammering the screw. It's using the right tool for the right task, isn't it? And Alex, to your point, there are certain areas where absolutely fixed pricing is the right approach, is what clients want. But I have conversations and did as a restructuring and insolvency partner with clients who, as Caroline's saying, they don't want fixed pricing actually, because they don't know exactly where it's going to go, and they fear that a fixed price could end up costing them more than if it's just charged by the hour. So there's going to be a real challenge, and for me, it's about having that conversation and exploring and testing with the clients to work out where the sweet spot is for different types of work.
Yeah, 100%. So before we move on to what will have the biggest impact, I think some of this already comes under that category, to be honest with you. But how do firms, everything that we've touched on really involves a huge amount of change, you know, from testing Gen AI to perhaps improving their operating procedures to, you know, to I don't know, there's so many things that we've touched on that involve change. Is that going to be perhaps the biggest challenge of all this year, just how to manage the sheer amount of change that firms are expected to cope with / undergo? Maybe Olivia, you could take that one.
Just trying to unmute. Yeah, no problem. I think it feeds into what I said sort of earlier on, which is, yes, there is a lot of change. There's a lot of change for all levels within a firm and providers to a firm to manage, and making sure that the pace of change, the pace is going to be fast. So how do you make sure that everybody's on that incredibly fast journey and knows where you're going? And I think sustainability of change requires really good communication amongst an organisation or a law firm, requires amazing leadership and management of people, and with the great communication and management of individuals and teams and people know where a law firm is going, and clients will understand as well, and that will help make everybody sustain the change, if that's the correct sentence to use. But there will be a lot going on, because it's not just across the tech tools that we're talking about here in terms of substantive legal activity, it's the operations as well, and it goes through whatever the clients are going through as well.
Yeah, and Caroline, interestingly, we've seen examples of good and bad change, but change that we've seen really deliver sustainable value for law firms is where it's sponsored right at the top. The clarity around the business outcomes the change is supposed to achieve are well documented and understood. Customers are taken on the journey of change as well, so communication is high, and it becomes a properly managed change program. I mean, where we see things go, a little bit wrong and the value is not achieved is where it becomes a great idea that then just has a life of its own with no clear objectives and outcomes. And actually the firm doesn't achieve those benefits. So it's got to be sponsored, documented, understood, communicated, and law firms' clients in particular need to be taken on that journey. Otherwise, people resist change.
And then used. So a lot of people, all those things you just talked about, Doug, before you implement a change and then you're communicating, and then often you might see people just don't use it because there's been a miss of the implementation or the training, and then you've lost some people along the way, and then you try and do it again and you've lost people. So the actual embedding that change through training and implementation and understanding of what it can do is key.
100%. We always talk, we've talked for years about people, process, technology, but I do feel that you can talk about it, but it's easy for the people bit to get forgotten along the way. Like there's so much focus on new tech, particularly now. With it, there's almost like there's all sort of panic stations, isn't there? And there's like there's all the competitive side of it as well. Which with in terms of focusing on the people a bit more, so focusing on the clients actually. So it feels like there's a real challenge in terms of clients. There's a question and I'm going to come back to it, so please carry on answering your questions. I promise I'm not ignoring you. But so just while we're on the people bit, so clients are expected. I went to a Chatham House conference about a year ago, and there was really people were still very much finding their way, and it was a really big corporation who said to everyone in the room, well, how are you saving us money? How are you passing on the costs of Gen AI? And everyone, no one was using Gen AI, and everyone just looked completely blindsided. And actually, maybe even more than a year ago, to be honest. And then so there's that element of managing the clients in terms of the clients are keen for firms to use Gen AI, but they also need explainability. And then there's the risk that law firms feel in terms of being the custodian of their data. We've had quite a long time now, in short terms, to come to terms with some of this stuff. Is 2025 going to be a year when we've perhaps got more on top of this, and if so, how? Maybe Sam, I don't know if you're able to come to this point.
Is 2025 the year that we're on top of it? If by that you mean the year that we get all the answers and we're there, I think the answer to that is no. I think we're all still learning, and there'll be a lot more to do. We're a lot further along, I think, as a sector than we were 12 months ago. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But there's still an education piece around how some of this AI works, and you touched on explainability. There are clients who are saying, with one hand, we really want you to use Gen AI, we really encourage you to do it, but then there'll be a contractual provision tucked away somewhere saying it must be explainable. And depending on how you interpret that word, it can be difficult to use Gen AI in that context, just because of the nature of Gen AI's architecture. It is a black box. So there's going to be, I think, more than this year required to fully move the conversation along. Yeah.
Someone said in the chat, we've explicitly been asked by a client if we're passing on savings gained by Gen AI usage. GCs are up against it, so it's a predictable question. I'm seeing it more and more. I'm seeing it more and more. And I'm not surprised. And actually, I think from speaking to in-house people, they're doing some really cool stuff in partnership with law firms as well. There's sort of a sense of us against them, but actually I've seen some quite cool, I think we're going to see some quite cool things come to market where there's some collaboration as well. And perhaps that's a way as well to get over some of this, from the people side of things, to try and partner rather than chucking stuff over the fence. you deal with this. And so in terms of, this regulation, so a couple of years ago, the LSV CEO said that regulation around AI was about 5 years behind. Do you think this has now caught up? Does anyone want to take that? I take it. I don't think the answer is no.
I think Caroline, I think the interesting, I think the technology is moving so fast. I think everyone's catching up, if that makes sense. And I think to Sam's point, will the industry be fully on top of it this year? Well, if the technology didn't move, yes, but the technology will continue to move. And I think there's already been examples where individuals in firms have suddenly realized that a query isn't free and actually it costs money, and maybe the commercial side of how to use AI responsibly in a firm needs rules and standards around it from within a firm. And there's been examples where private data has inadvertently been published without a private flag on it, and as soon as you do that, of course, it's in the wide domain, and suddenly your secrets are out there. So I think there is a need for education, there's a need for learning, there's a need for standards. But what I would say is the technology is moving fast, very, very fast, faster than I've seen in 20 years of being in software business. And I think every industry, not just the legal industry, every industry will be chasing it a little bit to make sure that there's a clear understanding of how and when and why it's used.
I think it's so different as well jurisdictionally. So we had in February a couple of the provisions of the EU AI Act came into effect, and they are taking quite a restrictive. There's an education piece that you can only work with AI if you have sufficient understanding. It prohibits certain uses of AI, whereas in America, obviously you've had President Trump come in and sort of pass executive orders undoing any of the AI safety regulations that President Biden put into effect. You see in Australia, I've seen courts where there's been ChatGPT disasters too recently, and the court have not had any kind of guidelines to give people in terms of expectations. And it feels like, and then, there's obviously UK guidance, but to me personally, from just a writer's angle, it feels like things are very different depending on where you are, and it's still very much that the regulation is not ahead of this at all. And in America, there's going to be far less regulation, which is going to present opportunities and massive challenges. So question for Sam: have you delivered legal prompting training? Is that too specific for this one? We can deal with some of the questions after, but if you want to
I'm happy to briefly answer it, Caroline. So one of the challenges with prompting, I think, is it's not necessarily the same for all the tools. There's frameworks and approaches you might use with a large language model in general, but a lot of the tools that are being made available in the legal sector have got a lot of the prompting done in the back end. And if you try and use a general prompting framework into those tools, you won't get the best outcomes, because you're then contradicting what's already been done and tested and worked very hard on by people who really know what they're talking about. So yes, we have done some training, but we've done it on a tool specific basis, giving examples of how it might work, as well as explaining conceptually how to think about it. But that's going to be an ongoing process. We're at step one of that. There is far more to do in the coming months and years.
Yeah. There's some questions or observations around cost and potential climate change impact as well. Clients don't understand potentially how much it costs to using and implementing a Gen AI solution, and then similarly, there's an impact on climate change in use of enormous amounts of water and power. In terms of challenges for this year, I do think that these are things that still probably are not taught, including me being guilty of it, still probably not talked about enough. Is this coming into people's conversations, in terms of we should really be thinking and talking about this more?
I think it's from my perspective, I would say it's probably a theme that is coming across in DEI, in ESG themes across any law firm. So the way in which Gen AI can impact environments, or how we can improve our use of AI in an environmentally less impactful way is important. So, for example, how we make sure that we're using it in the most efficient way possible, how we make sure our firms are set up in the most efficient way possible to use it. That would apply to other industries as well. So there must be a lot of learnings that as an industry we can get from other industries, if that makes sense. And I think that Gen AI also has an impact on DEI. So those are pretty big themes to get involved with in this shorter conversation, but really important ones, very interesting ones, and I'm sure ones that will be tackled by jurisdictions going forward and frameworks that we should see. But that's a really interesting thought. Because on the one hand, clients seek an incredibly efficient running machine and output with incredible high value attributed to it, and there could be a cost to do that.
Yeah.
Cost in the non-financial sense.
And it needs to be part of the conversation. We
Yeah,
need to be
it's
thinking about
interesting,
it.
isn't it?
And we're speaking to suppliers around reporting, because for some tools you can look at the token cost, you can work out roughly what your carbon impact is, for example, but for other tools that's not as clear straight away. So I think the industry needs to move along in terms of allowing people to at least measure some of that impact.
Yeah, 100%. Just we're mostly going to be spending our time talking about challenges, by the way. I've realised. But so just quick, like the other thing on this sort of topic, like cybersecurity, although it's very different actually. But so we haven't talked about it, and this is something that I know clients, it's an impact. It has a big impact for everybody. The challenges that it will bring in new challenges for cybersecurity. Doug, do you want to just give us a little bit of what you're seeing in terms of how people are responding to that, or the biggest challenges?
Yeah, so I think that the challenges are well recorded. That increasingly, cyber criminals, state-funded cyber criminals, their ability to infiltrate and use technology to infiltrate is increasing dramatically. The need to protect against that, and I think it's one of the clear drivers, Caroline, for a greater move to consume things like public cloud infrastructure, where there is greater levels of defence within that environment. But I think, again, what we see is that the skill, the capability of the cyber criminals is increasing dramatically as they start to use tools readily available to them to seek and try and find weakness in infrastructure. And sadly, the legal market alongside the health and care market are very attractive areas for cyber criminals that hold very, very sensitive data that, if exfiltrated, will be very valuable in the wrong hands. So we just see a lot of activity in that area continuing, and our suggestion is always, use the most readily available protection. Make sure the good practice within your firm about being up to date in terms of your laptop, desktop, and just the awareness of your employees. If something looks odd, it probably is odd. So don't open attachments unless you're absolutely sure. But sadly, we see many of our customers using older technology that fall foul of this and find themselves on the wrong side of a cyber incident.
Yeah. In terms of so strategies to go so going forward, I'm just conscious of sort of not just dwelling purely on the challenges. So in terms of looking forward, so we've talked about people. I think perhaps within looking forward for the year, I think so focusing on people, focusing on talent retention is going to be key. Focusing on culture, focusing on platform. Let's do a little bit of a dive into perhaps less focusing on just the pure challenges, but perhaps how we put strategies in place to have the biggest impact in the year ahead. So we've talked about some of these things. Let's perhaps dive into the things that people should be thinking about. So Olivia, you've talked about culture of innovation and change. We've talked about giving people the platform. So perhaps Sam, maybe Sam, you could talk a little bit more about that. We've talked about putting in place operating procedures. So what do we need to be thinking about now in terms of looking at the year ahead, in terms of facilitating perhaps the use of Gen AI or whatever it might be in terms of becoming more digitally enabled? What do we sort of need to think about, do you think, in terms of creating the right environment to really make meaningful change this year?
I think there's quite a few aspects to that, Caroline. As you said before, Olivia talked about having that culture of innovation there as the base, and I think that's really important. The messaging piece is really important as well. So I've been keen and really pleased to see that our board is engaged with it and enthused with it and sharing that enthusiasm with the firm, as is the wider partnership. I think people seeing that is a really important part of it. For me, the strategy that we went down was to give a tool to everyone, make it available to everyone, encourage them to experiment with it in the areas that they know best. And I think that's really important because that will help with adoption. It will allow that sort of contagion of the idea from one person to another in a way that if you've not got a full enterprise license available for something, it can sort of stymie that spread. But I touched before on the fact that I think this year is a lot about learning. And we need to make sure there are processes in place. Any firm needs to make sure there are processes in place to ensure that use cases are not in that general sense of summarization or review and document analysis, but particular structures of use cases are shared, because what works in one area, what works for one person, will work in another. And we're going to put in place frameworks around that, both for the use cases and to some extent for the prompts that support them as well.
So you're doing a lot around workflows and process mapping.
I think process mapping for some of this work, some of the use cases we're talking about, this can be a little bit different to some of the more traditional legal tech, which really has its place and still, to my mind, has its place in a world of Gen AI. But the barriers to entry on Gen AI are, to my mind, much lower. So if you look at some of the old machine learning tools, the amount of work involved to get it to work for a particular use case for you was significant. Same with document automation. There is work involved in setting things up in the first place. It is easier with this to experiment and test with pretty much out of the box to see whether it works for a particular use case. And I think it can fit into lower volume, more novel workflows in a way that some of the traditional legal tech struggled with. So yes, sharing the learning and constantly trying to work out how we can improve our use of it, but not necessarily in that really prescriptive sense of having a detailed process map for every single novel matter that we might be working on across the firm. For some areas, absolutely, that's really important. But to my mind, my personal view is I don't think that can work for everything that we try and do as a full service firm.
Yeah. Alex, so you set out to do things in a completely different way, starting with standing operating procedures and starting to think about doing things differently. And now you've had sort of many years reflecting on your own things that have worked and things that haven't worked. What will your reflections be, perhaps, seeing where we are in the industry, seeing some of the challenges that firms are having, and seeing, we haven't always been the most sort of standard operating procedure of our industry, but what would you say your learnings have been over the years that perhaps would be relevant to people right now?
So I think incentives matter, right? We've kind of touched on that, because unless you get the incentives aligned, then it's too hard. I think the structural stuff of not being a partnership has been very helpful for us, because the first thing you learn as a young lawyer is to be a chameleon, and this partner needs it like this partner needs it like that. That kind of power structure makes it very hard, again, incentives and so on, to deliver a kind of improvement. The data structure has been hugely important for us, and we've now got pretty much an integrated data structure across the whole firm. And as we're kind of implementing AI, we're kind of fitting it in within that data structure. And I think that's going to be super important, because I do think you need deterministic systems supporting AI, because I didn't really agree about the agentic stuff in the sense of AI figuring out the next step. That seems utterly terrifying to me, given a lot of work I've been doing with AI. So I'd much rather have deterministic process we've thought through in advance, and then AI is plugged in for the bits that we just couldn't do with ML before, or we couldn't do with expert system, we couldn't do with whatever. So we'll have a use. So kind of implementing it in that structure has been incredibly important. What's great satisfaction to me is that the years we've spent trying to figure out exactly how you slice up the data turns out to be like pretty resilient and works even as we go through all these new things. But like the big push for me is just the culture, which is so hard, of continuous improvement, right? And for me, continuous improvement should be bottom up, grassroots led. We set challenges at the firm, but like the team, and empowering them to actually make the changes. But persuading people they have more agency than they think is quite hard, it turns out. And we're still in the cat herding business that working with lawyers involved, so it's not like it's easy. But so that stuff's kind of really held true for us. Yeah,
it seems that data, speaking to people at the end of last year when we were doing some forecasting, and data just came up time and time again because of things that people have been doing over the past year, where they've been sort of experiments and then they've hit into a brick wall. And it's always not the quality of the data that will underpin that, and actually obviously training, people's training and people's ability and their understanding. in terms of so capturing people's, so giving people the platform, sharing learning, sharing knowledge, workflow process mapping to an extent, standard operating procedures, being clear about use cases, I think it's fair to say, and also perhaps building a client-centric approach, would you say, Olivia, in terms of, so making sure that we continue over the next year to put the client at the focus and center of everything that people do?
Yeah, you can balance a sort of a one-size-fits-all approach to a client-centric, tailored approach for clients. So you can see clients asking for particular types of platforms being made available, or more bespoke tools, more bespoke platforms, and balance that with the more one-size-fits-all, which sounds a dreadful way of phrasing things. It's a dreadful phrase for anything, one-size-fits-all approach, but you all know what I mean. So balancing those two is important, but the key thing is engaging with clients, making sure your clients understand what you're trying to achieve, how you're adding value to them, how you're making sure that your relationship with that client is the best that it can be. And so that's why I'm talking about different types of approaches and balancing those. And I think the innovative approach can help there.
Anyone else have anything to add on that?
I think it's the bit that's often forgotten when people are thinking about the use of technology to drive outcomes, the actual client experience and what works for them and what builds that sustainable relationship going forward. I think the points Alex made as well around culture is so important within a firm. It's easy to say culture, but what does that mean to a firm? What are the values they want to live? And I've seen businesses recently that have implemented things like a culture of curiosity, because technology's changing and because client relationships are changing and because compliance is always a burden for the industry. They've really imposed the idea of being curious, and they've even found time in the day to give people time back to go and be curious. So it's interesting, all the different things I'm seeing in the marketplace, not just to talk about culture, but try and drive and embed a culture and a way of working. That culture should absolutely embrace customer relationships and ways of working.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to a little bit about the partnership model that Alex referred to, though. It's a real challenge. I mean, we're seeing firms giving people back time that counts as billable time towards innovation. It continues to be, it's a perennial challenge within a law firm environment, isn't it? Because if you're held to that sort of huge billable target, it'll be interesting to see as things evolve, whether it'll be easier to have that culture of curiosity as things move on.
It's certainly in our own firm, it's essential for us to live the values for the reasons we were talking about earlier. The technology is moving so fast, and I take Alex's point about terrifying to think about agentic AI. It terrifies me as well, Alex. I can absolutely assure you that the idea that you could have a friend sat next to you that isn't really a friend sat next to you but is helping you with the day job. But the reality is things are moving so fast that for us as a tech company, we have to allow time for developers and people within the organization to continue to learn on the job, so that they're in the best possible position to advise our clients about likelihood outcomes and things they should be thinking of. But within the world of legal, of course, it puts pressure on time and outcomes and delivery of customer value. But I think the market, technology are changing so fast. So I would encourage that curious culture as a way to get people and employees really embedded in the culture of the business you want in the future.
Yeah. We're in such an interesting stage where I still see, and it takes me back to the days when we had like the likes of Kira with contract review, right? And everybody was doing these sort of like side by side, nobody trusted it. And do you remember you'd have to do your M&A transaction, and then you'd be running Kira, and then you'd be like, everyone would be like, I don't think it works. And then you compare the results, and it was a real painful process. And I feel like that's a bit like where we're at now. I feel like we don't, and there's very good reasons in some cases. This is different technology. Obviously, we've got the element of hallucination and the need for verification in a very different way than we used to have. But I feel like that's where we're at now, you know, that, and it's hugely time consuming, you know, in terms of running these sort of side by side, but it's a painful period. It's an exciting period, but it's a bit painful right now, isn't it? I mean, for anybody sort of involved in it, I think the sort of the excitement, sense of potential, and also the kind of, oh my God, I wish this would go away, probably is there in equal measure at the moment.
I mean, it's certainly exciting, and our lives would certainly be easier if no one had invented Gen AI in some respects. But hopefully, fast forward a bit once we're all used to this, and our lives will be even easier because they did. So, so yeah, let's look ahead.
I can't wait. I can't wait for you to see these sort of side by side results of human versus Gen AI that's coming out. It's just, it's completely mind blowing. Is just lastly then, so are you looking? Is software? So are you looking at sort of specific legal software? We've asked when we advertised this webinar, I'm saying, in what ways can you look to legal software to help you move forward as a business? I suppose that's more of a question for the likes of, so for Alex or Sam, but for anybody, you know, I don't know if Doug, you want to answer that, but are you looking at specific legal software for 2025 that you can talk about?
We're trying a bunch of the LLM tools, right? So absolutely trying them out, seeing if they're use cases. We've built our own stack around Llama and feeding that in, which I think will be interesting. We're getting pretty good results out of the contract, Caroline. I'm actually waiting for exactly that answer, the accuracy one that someone's building some tests and looking at the whole screen right now. But the big thing for us is we're doing a teardown of our front end of all of our IT and rebuilding it and yada yada. So now we've kind of integrated everything behind. It's the chance to integrate everything as the interface for the team and so on. So that's going to be exciting, bringing that through. So yeah.
Awesome. I should say that Alex was one of the first people, when I first started writing about legal technology, Alex was one of the first people I met, and he kept talking about all this stuff, and I understood not a single word. It's always been super fun having chats with you. I hopefully understand a bit more now. That was like about a decade ago. But anyway, Sam, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, like Alex, we're looking at a number of things. We've built some point solutions ourselves using Azure OpenAI Studio, and we've got a few more in the works. But probably the biggest thing for us is we've signed up to make co-counsel, so Thomson Reuters Gen AI Assistant, available to the whole firm. So we're the first firm in the UK to sign up to do that, and we deployed that about 2 weeks ago, just under 2 weeks ago. So we're very much embracing this. There is a very big exercise going on to see how we can leverage as much value for our clients from that, and it's really exciting, if mildly terrifying. So yeah.
What has the response been like so far, if you don't mind me asking?
It's been really interesting. I have been surprised by where the responses have come from. So we're only a week and 4 days in, so I haven't sent out any surveys or anything like that yet. But anecdotally, the number of people who I don't even know who are getting in touch out of the blue, and people who you wouldn't necessarily think would hold themselves out as being particularly excited by tech, and actually several who expressly say that they don't like tech, are really embracing it and finding interesting ways of using it on what they're working on, both from a legal point of view and actually from things like a BD point of view, thinking, right, well, we need to try and understand this to do this targeting, and we could use co-counsel to help with that. So far, it's really exciting. I have a lot of confidence that this is going to work, but the reality is I'll be able to tell you a lot more in probably about 3 to 6 months' time, because right now I would expect the usage stats to do reasonably well, because everyone will be logging on and giving it a try. The acid test will be, right, well, how much of that use base has stuck? That's what we want. The regular monthly, then weekly, then probably daily users. That's what we need to be targeting and measuring.
Yeah, can't wait to catch up on that one. There's a question, we've got a couple of minutes left. I'm just wondering, can I ask this? With the availability of integrated AI technology, will the availability of integrated AI technology influence the selection of replacement of PMS finance and case management systems?
It's going to be quite hard to find one which doesn't have it integrated, right? It's being sprinkled on everything.
So, and going back to then the point that we were just talking about. So Doug, did you have any final thoughts on that in terms of what you're seeing, perhaps?
Yeah, we're seeing lots of creation of high good quality use cases out there, because I think there's been a period of AI is the answer, what's the question historically, and now increasingly it's becoming, back to my point right at the start, Caroline, what is the real discernible, valuable and sustainable use case we're trying to deliver, and how does that benefit our clients? I mean, we're seeing a lot in areas of the administrative burden of law, if I could call it that. So, how can we help more in areas of email handling, document creation, compliance, ways of working, and that build to cash area that I spoke about earlier. So we're certainly thinking about, and we see in the industry thinking about, the areas that matter for a lawyer, so the lawyer can have more time with their clients. Seems to be an emerging trend that's coming out of the use of AI. But I think it's fascinating, because I think if we go back 6 months or 12 months, there was lots of talk of AI. There was a fair bit of fear, uncertainty and doubt in the industry, and there was lots of poorly thought through use cases. I think the industry is in a lot better place, and where it certainly interests us and where we're having most conversations with our clients is that administrative burden, therefore operational efficiency, number one, and secondly, assist us in areas of the burden of compliance, please, as a key area number two.
Okay, that's really well. That's a brilliant place to end. I think there's that expression, isn't there, about we always overestimate the speed of change in the short term and underestimate the speed of change in the long term. And I don't know where this year sits on that table. So, because we've been doing this Gen AI thing for a little while now, haven't we? But I do feel like this is going to be a really big year in terms of really starting to see some proper use cases that people will hopefully start talking about. And we're already seeing that, which I think is so helpful, and seeing what works and what doesn't. And I do feel lucky to be part of this legal tech industry where we do share, and it's a privilege to have these kind of conversations. So I'd just like to say thank you to all of the panel for chatting through these really important topics at this really important time. Certainly for journalists, it is a complete nightmare with the amount of stuff happening. But thank you, and thank you to everybody for listening in and for your questions. It's been a real pleasure chatting with you all today.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a lovely day. Bye.
You too. Bye.